Shadowrun Returns is an interesting title. It came out in an era when Kickstarter was just getting its grassroots going, and also when we were discovering that sometimes backing games could end up with empty pockets and no game at all. However, that wasn't the case when this came to this CRPG. Released back in 2013 by Harebrained Schemes, it heralded a return to this beloved franchise seen primarily just at tabletop gaming. I remember being part of a couple tabletop sessions back in the day, and I always found it really enjoyable. This mix of fantasy and sci-fi cyberpunk. While the concept isn't highly original, as it's obviously borrowed some of the best concepts from both fantasy and sci-fi, it offered a fleshed out world in which one could be an orcish samurai or an elven cyber thief. All of this really sounds cool when you think about it. This game also offers a workshop, and there's still many mods to examine in its extensive library, but today we're going to go ahead and look at the base campaign offered, Dead Man's Switch by Harebrained Schemes. As for the campaign, I think it's important to note that it is narrative heavy, combat's light to maybe moderate, and roleplay is frankly broken, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. As always, remember if you like this style of content to go ahead and give a thumbs up and subscribe, but let's go ahead and dive in. I think it's important to note that when playing in the world of Shadowrun, to think of it as a divergent reality, one in which magic is real along with normal human progress. This is possible due to the ebb and flow of magic existing on the world itself. In the current timeline that's presented, there was an awakening that happened in 2011 where magic along with elves and dwarves started manifesting in humans, and then followed by other distinct races like orcs and trolls. In Shadowrun Returns, we are given the opportunity to play either a human, dwarf, elf, orc, or even a troll. I felt like being a troll in a cyberpunk setting would be interesting, and that's the way I went. Like any good RPG, there is a variety of choices when determining a class, like a rigger that plays around with robotics, a shaman that uses totems to summon spirits, or just a straight up mage. There is also the Matrix. Remember I said they've taken things from other places, which is used a lot in missions and settings, and is basically a virtual reality world where things like server data files can be hacked into, and this also replaces the normal internet that we know of today. But once selecting the race and class, then it comes down to the skills. And this is set up by having base trees like body or intelligence that you can add points to, and then skills below them that affect a certain path, like how powerful a magical spell you can cast or its accuracy on the target, which can play a pretty big important role. In Dead Man's Switch, it's a relatively short campaign run of about 7 to 10 hours, and trying to dabble into all these many different aspects presented just won't really work out well. Overall, even at a normal setting, I'd recommend just sticking to a few base trees and synergizing within those selected skills. Say for example my troll, which was primarily strength and body, and the trees under them that would help me become a better fighter. As I mentioned before, there is a roleplay available in Shadowrun Returns, but for Dead Man's Switch it was implemented pretty poorly, as the system itself can be difficult to incorporate into your gameplay. Take for example etiquette is broken down into like factions like gang, socialite, etc. One could branch into socialite, but might only have the opportunity to sway a conversation a few times throughout the entire playthrough. Even then, the consequences of the dialogue tree doesn't really matter, as the end results are usually very much the same. So we have this nice system that could be incorporated, but instead it just really totally falls flat, and you never know which one's going to be the best unless you use a guide and you try to follow suit, which would take a lot of the fun out of it if you ask me. So basically I'm saying roleplay, it's pretty much nil in Dead Man's Switch. Combat is a mixed bag. The higher you go in difficulty, some builds just frankly become useless. This is mainly due to the fact of usage of skills and the distance of opponents given in a fight, powering up your character before even engaging, and things of that nature. As far as turn-based goes, basically your team goes and then the enemy goes, or vice versa. Movement and combat are tied together, as well as a cover system. If anyone's played XCOM, then this is pretty much the same kind of setup. One thing of note that I do like for strategy in the system is that you can use one action of a character, switch to another character and use an action, and so on until all the members have exhausted all their available action points. So you can have your mage buff your fighter, debuff the enemy with another character, and then switch to your fighter to hit them with whatever kind of cool little combinations you can come up with. I also know that some people don't like that you stay locked in turn-based even when there's no enemies around. This happens a lot in Dead Man's Switch. There are opportunities to move your whole party to a given location, but if it's a major setting with multiple enemies close by, spy, you're going to stay locked into this turn-based system. So in the beginning, I got to say that it is actually kind of annoying trying to find where the enemies are located, but by the end game, I found that this system was actually pretty engaging because I would set up my pieces and then I would use like Overwatch as someone would open the door and check to see who's inside of it, and it just felt really kind of strategic and cool. This also allowed my party not to be hit too often with surprise damage and to press the situation a lot sooner. Anyways, some people, they'll really dig this, and then others, that frankly, they'll just hate it. As far as the party system set up in the campaign, it's a little bit weak as well, as there really isn't tight bonds established with a full team. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of missions where you would be forming up with somebody entirely different, or you'll pick your team and there's not a chance for a lot of reoccurring characters, but this will happen from time to time. As for the campaign story, we find ourselves as a runner that hasn't seen a lot of runs lately. Money's tight and shit rolls downhill in this mega corporation world. There's a lot of poor and drugs are rampant. We find ourselves slumming it up in a cheap apartment when we get a call from an old buddy of ours. Before long, we actually realize that he's dead, and hence the name of the story, Dead Man's Switch. And then we find out that he'll pay us if we can find out who the killer is. I gotta admit, the story, it's pretty great. The dialogue might be heavy in sections, but man, it really pulls you along as we stumble from one part of the city block to the next, trying to figure out who killed our buddy, and eventually it uncovers something way more sinister. So without spoiling it, I really got to say that the story shines in this Shadowrun world that's been created. Lastly is the music. Now, I love cyberpunk music in most games, and Shadowrun Returns doesn't disappoint. Each different track is really different from the next and sounds great, but even as great as it is, after being on the same level for say an hour or so and hearing the same track on repeat, man, it begins to wear a little bit thin. But with that being said, it is still worth a listen, and here we go. Dead Man's Switch is a really good story-driven campaign. Unfortunately, due to the design of skills and the overall systems in place by this first foray by harebrained schemes, it ultimately leaves a lot to be desired and explored. If one just sticks to the most basic design and hammers through like it's a hack and slash with some narrative story, then I really don't think you'll be disappointed. But I wouldn't look into trying to enjoy any of the really complex systems found in most RPGs, particularly the charisma etiquette paths. Well, that's it for this one. I'm going to go ahead and call it a wrap. Have a great day gaming. Later.